Hit the switch. My fingers have to look dry. It's real funny when your fingers are looking for something that you're looking at. Well, you better find a place to sit down.
There, Tony, can that guy come over to you?
We'll move over there. I'm nimble.
Get a good view of John's profile.
The doctor wanted me to use a cane. The doctor wanted me to use a cane. But if I have the top, I only have one hand that works. So if I use the cane on this hand, I don't have any hand that works.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to Griffith Observatory in the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater. Today we've got a very special event, and as you are, I'm sure, aware today, well, actually the 14th of this month was the 95th anniversary, 95th birthday of John Dobson. And John Dobson...
And it was an ordinary day.
It was an ordinary day in 1915. Yes. Now, just to make sure we're all a little bit on the same page of who John Dobson is, I wanted to give a couple perspectives. I can only give my own, but I've also asked Katie Hogland, who's one of our telescope demonstrators, but who's also, since the age of, 11 or something, been an associate of John Dobson's in the Sidewalk Astronomers, which is a worldwide organization that he helped found. I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective, maybe just from, I'll do it a little less formally here, from the viewpoint of, I built some telescopes. I got interested myself when I was about 12 years old. And there was kind of an established way of doing it. And that takes us back to, well, let's go back a century. A century ago, if you wanted a telescope, you had to be actually fairly wealthy, because the only telescopes that were built for looking at the skies were refracting telescopes. They were usually made out of very fine brass. We have an example upstairs. The very first telescope of Los Angeles is now on display, and it's a 5-inch refracting telescope that was considered a pretty big deal at the time. But really it was frustrating to a lot of people. If you wanted to look at the sky, you had to look through somebody else's, or you had to be rich. Now that started changing in the 1920s. A fellow named Russell W. Porter started. Well, he and Albert Ingalls, who was the editor of Scientific American magazine, kind of collaborated on articles that fired up people across the country. People mainly who were machinists or worked with materials. Porter pointed out it was both fun and easy actually to build your own telescope. So instead of spending thousands of dollars on some fairly small instrument, you could make something, a reflecting telescope, much bigger. And basically it was a fun hobby, and the article had appeared in 1925 in Scientific American, set off a firestorm. The Springfield, Vermont amateurs were the first club to build telescopes. The second was the Los Angeles Club here, and are joining us also today. And so, it was a big hobby. If you wanted a telescope, build your own. Now, when I got into it in the 1970s, it was sort of a dying hobby, though. Part of the reason was it had become kind of formal. There was a certain way to do it right. And it involved a lot of other things besides really building telescopes. You had to build testers and various things. And I think it became kind of orthodox, and if you really wanted to do it right, you had to machine mountings and counterweights and all this and that. You'd end up with a nice instrument, but unless you were rich, it was going to be a pretty small one. The other problem was, because it involved counterweights and stuff, is that it wasn't very portable. And I think as time has gone on, if you really want to look at the sky, you have to get away from the glow of the cities and stuff. So portability is important. So home-built telescopes were beginning to, it wasn't such a big hobby when I got involved. The gentleman sitting over here, I think, changed people's attitudes a great deal. John Dobson, starting in the late 1960s, if I recall, or mid-60s, is that right, John? About when did you start building telescopes?
Oh, I don't remember when I started making telescopes, but the sidewalk astronomer started in 1967.
Okay, so around that time,
1968.
the organization you started began touring around with telescopes that you guys designed.
But I'd been making telescopes before that.
Okay, but you started with those kind of traditional books anyway, right?
I had one stupid little book. And nobody to talk to.
But what John did was actually made telescopes that were mechanically very simple, yet
And they were made out of porthole glass.
porthole glass, your tubes are cardboard, the mechanical heavy parts are plywood, and you end up with something like this.
I tell people if they want to make a telescope, get to California. We have all these cardboard tubes and they're already made.
So no longer was it a daunting task to actually, well, first of all, make a telescope that's a lot bigger than what people used to consider a big telescope. An 8-inch
Because
telescope.
the porthole comes up to 2 feet in diameter.
Yeah, so instead of getting the finely cured Pyrex glass that just like Palomar had, that maybe you could get 6 inches or 8 inches for your beginning telescope, John found by using porthole glass, which is 4 times the area of that kind of stuff, that you could build telescopes that were huge but didn't cost very much. And also just your attitude towards the mechanical side of it. You build the telescope with the optics. So you're not stuck with a beautiful mirror with no place to go, which is really what happens with at least used to happen a lot with amateur mirrors. You build a mirror, but you didn't know how to build the mechanical part, so you built a mirror. But I think his type really encouraged a lot more finished telescopes. And I know the only kind of telescope I ever finished out of maybe 4 or 5 mirrors that I've made was a Dobson design.
Well, we made it 24. The mirror was 24.5 inches across, and the whole telescope weighs 600 pounds. And we've hauled it for more than 80,000 miles, and it's too late to tell me it's not portable.
That's right. So I just also wanted to mention that in the orthodoxy that sort of existed in telescope making in, say, the early 70s, Sky and Telescope magazine, which is still the preeminent sort of amateur journal, I guess they must have gotten a stack of papers from John Dobson describing the great success he had with this new way of building telescopes simply that would encourage people to do it. But if you look at this letter at all, you see that they weren't at all interested because obviously it was impossible to make a telescope by shortcutting all the orthodoxy that had been established. And but what's interesting in the same book where I found that letter reproduced, there's also all of these awards that shortly followed from all of the amateur organizations around the country. The highest awards awarded to telescope builders, and this is just to give you a flavor of some of the things John has done. Some of John's methods have been written up. I guess he collaborated in a book called "How and Why to Make a User-Friendly Sidewalk Telescope," which is, by the way, built. The covers are plywood. Very interesting book. And now people build telescopes. Based on the inspiration of these original designs, but now people build up to 30-inch telescopes or so that fit into compact cars. And really, this whole enthusiasm and giant size of telescope is really thanks to John Dobson, who's sitting right beside me here. Now, I'll turn it over to Katie Hogland, our telescope demonstrator.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking John for getting me to where I am today. It was actually on his, I suppose it must have been your 82nd birthday, that I first met John up here at Griffith